I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the new Audi Q5 Sportback. The rise and rise of SUVs, particularly in the premium segment, means that Audi are looking for more and more ways to differentiate their lineup of crossovers and tap into all sorts of new niches, and that's what the Q5 Sportback is all about. The company recently told us 80% of their Australian sales are now for their SUVs, meaning that buyers are walking past awesome cars like the A4 and A5 straight towards the Q5. And the A5 Sportback is actually quite popular among the brand's passenger cars, and that vehicle has now inspired this, the Q5 Sportback, taking the brand's most popular vehicle, the Q5 midsize SUV, lopping off some of that more conservative roofline from the wagon-bodied version, and creating this, a kind of quasi-coupe SUV. Now, straight off the bat, styling is subjective. I'm not quite sure the proportions are as slick on the Q5 Sportback as, say, the Q3 Sportback or the Q8, which only comes as a Sportback, but it's still a pretty handsome vehicle, particularly in ultra blue like this 45 TFSI petrol over my shoulder. Over my left shoulder is a white diesel, because you can get this vehicle as a 40 TDI as well, and there's an SQ5, which Ponch is going to be doing a separate review of. The engine you can't choose in Sportback, guys, is the 50 TDI, the non-SQ5 V6 diesel, and I'll explain why when we take this vehicle for a drive. In today's video, we'll check out the interior, look at whether you have to make any compromises in order to go with the Sportback. We'll discuss the running costs, and then we'll head out on the road in this new cutaway Audi Coupe SUV to see how it drives. But before we get started, hit subscribe below the video. Opting to buy the Q5 Sportback petrol over the base diesel is going to cost you about another $8,000, but you do get quite a lot of extra stuff included as standard, not just more power from the engine, but also Nappa leather in the interior, which is one thing that really transforms the perceived expense of the car. The standard seats, which we'll show you here, are nice, definitely comfortable, supportive, and they feel expensive, but the Nappa leather really looks like SQ5 grade. The diamond stitching is really cool, and even though this car has black leather, which is a little bit conservative, it does have light grey stitching, which kind of lifts the visual appeal of the cabin. They look sporty and they hold you in well, even though these side bolsters are not adjustable. That would be cool if it had that feature. Either way though, both front seats are electrically adjustable in most of the ways you'd expect, and they both have four-way lumbar, which we like to see. So often we see luxury cars where the passenger seat doesn't have lumbar, and that person's back does kind of matter as well. The only thing the passenger seat misses out on is memory, which only the driver gets in this car. However, the steering wheel is manual. That's fine, but kind of this vehicle goes for just under $100,000 before on-road costs, so an electric steering wheel would be good. Speaking of that wheel, really tidy, perforated, paddle shifters, lovely stitching, looks expensive, feels expensive, and is about the right size for this car, I think. We've also got aluminium trim here, that looks good, although the other vehicle, the white diesel, has lovely open pore wood, which is $400, but looks way more expensive than a $400 option normally would, in my opinion. Speaking of options that are about $400, I have a beverage cooler down here between the seats. $390 for that one, and you only get one, so only one person's drink gets to be colder or hotter, because you can toggle that. Now, I've had my water down here chilling for about 5 minutes, and it's pretty cold. If I stick my whole pour down there, it's bloody freezing. So I think if I left my drink in for another 5 or 10 minutes, it'd be nice and chilly. And you can also heat if you've got a coffee in the morning or something like that. Now, let's look up here at the dashboard, which is handsome. It's easy to see what's going on. The design of this car doesn't overwhelm you like it does in some luxury cars. Instead, it's nice and understated. We've got this new 10-inch touchscreen that replaced a previous non-touchscreen that used to be driven through a MMI rotary dial. Sadly, the rotary dial is dead, replaced with a tiny hole on a swathe of piano black. But the screen itself is nice and easy to interact with. It's very snappy. It's clearly got a lot of processing power behind it, and it has wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. In front of us, we have Audi's virtual cockpit, satellite mapping right in front of you, all configurable through these really nice clicky buttons on the steering wheel. And even though I prefer BMW's iDrive system on the dash, which still has a rotary dial, Audi's virtual cockpit is so good that I feel like this car probably has the best infotainment in the segment when taken as a whole. And the stereo is a Bang & Olufsen 3D unit that requires a bit of fine tuning in order to get it sounding completely right. But once you've put the time and effort into that, it is really beautiful. And that's part of a $5,000 Technic package that also gives you OLED tail lights, a heads-up display, and privacy glass behind me where I am now. In terms of practicality, I've mentioned the cup holders. We have a sliding phone tray with wireless charging, which is cool. I've talked about the hole, another hole here, and decently big door bins. So on the whole, it's okay, although some rivals, including the BMW X3, have a little bit more storage space throughout their interior. So that's the front seat, comfortable and clear. Let's have a look at the back. Even though the Sportback does have that slightly cutaway roofline, you can see it's not really causing me any grief. I'm 6 foot tall, headroom is still fine, legroom's good, toe room's good. The middle seat is just about usable, although the hump in the floor is pretty massive, so this car's best thought of as really a 4-seater, but you can get 4 adults in without too much of an issue. We do have air vents and a third climate zone here in the 4-cylinder petrol. We've got 2 more USB ports, the old style USB port, and a 12-volt socket, plus map pockets in both of the seat backs here in the rear. We also have a flip-down armrest. We've got cup holders in there, that's all good. And like the front, the materials are soft, not especially squidgy, but it still feels really, really high quality, this Q5. And one nice little bit of attention to detail I just noticed. You know how when you open a door in any old car, the dome lights all turn on to show that a door is open? The Q5 Sportback is smart enough to only turn on the dome light relevant to that seat. So at the moment, the rear passenger door is open. That's where the camera is sitting right now. But the only dome light that's on is the left-hand side one in the back. If I open my door, now the right one turns on. Just a tiny thing, but really nice attention to detail. Here around the back of the Q5 Sportback is where you'll spot basically all the visual differentiation. It's not just the cutaway roofline, although that is the major change compared to the standard car. You'll see that the glass house is pretty similar to a normal Q5, particularly at the front. It looks quite high actually compared to some other coupe SUVs, but here at the back it's definitely cutaway. The diffuser is also completely different compared to the standard Q5, and the 4-cylinder cars do away with any kind of visual fake exhaust. It's all hidden down below. You can let me know what you think of that decision down below, but it's kind of edging away from that sort of exhaust pipe look because EVs don't need them. Now, the Q5 doesn't come in an electric version. There's not even a plug-in hybrid in Australia, but there is in some other markets. Now, this car is fitted with the matte aluminium styling package, and I think that works really well with the Ultra Blue. This is a new blue for the Audi Q5. Looks pretty stunning in my eyes. You can get a black pack though, which blacks out all of this aluminium stuff, and that does suit some colors well, like District Green, great color, but suits the black pack, definitely. Now, power tailgate, that's standard from the base diesel upward. That gets out of your way quickly and quietly, and opens up to reveal a boot that measures the same size as the standard Q5, but that's because boots are typically measured to the window line, and that doesn't change at all in the Q5 Sportback. It's above the window line where clearly it is a smaller boot. If you're packaging something tall in this boot, it could fit into the wagon, but it won't fit into the Sportback. That being said, Audi have a number of larger SUVs, the e-tron, the Q7, the Q8, which you could buy if you want an even bigger boot. Either way, it's well sized, it's nice and square. You've got this pleasant finisher here so you don't scratch that lovely blue paint. We've got a net so your groceries aren't sliding around when you're enjoying the dynamic capabilities of the car. And then underneath this boot floor, we have a collapsible space saver, netting, remote releases to drop those back seats, and controls to lower the whole car, because this one, interestingly, is fitted with the $4,000 air suspension, which is a phenomenal option on the Q5. Transforms the ride, and I'll talk more about that when we take this car for a drive. Controls here to close the boot or close it and lock the vehicle. And that leaves just one more chapter before the driving, and that's running costs. So what's it going to cost you to run an Audi Q5 Sportback? Well, the question starts with which engine you're going to choose, because there's 2 diesels and a petrol sitting in between them, and they all use a different amount of fuel. Now, the 45 TFSI petrol over there, in our testing, that uses around 9.5 litres per 100 Ks, which is pretty manageable. But the diesels are really frugal. The 4-cylinder diesel, we're able to use 7 litres per 100 in our testing, which is really low. And on the highway, you'll get it even lower than that for phenomenal range above 1,000 Ks. Whereas the SQ5 diesel, again, like the 4-cylinder petrol, that uses about 9 litres per 100, which again, not too bad based on the performance that vehicle offers. So for people looking to go the furthest and pay the least in fuel, the base diesel is going to make the most sense. Servicing, they all cost about the same to service if you purchase an Audi service pack up front for 5 years and 75,000 Ks of scheduled maintenance. That's $3,140 in the 4-cylinders, $3,190 in the 6-cylinder SQ5. Warranty, unfortunately, is only 3 years on all Audis sold in Australia. However, that is something that dealers negotiate on. So if you're planning to buy this car, you should insist that a 5-year warranty is included for nothing, because Mercedes-Benz give you a 5-year warranty as standard here in Australia. Do not accept less. And insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $1,372 to comprehensively insure a new Audi Q5. Everybody's situation varies and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage the car, your driving history, etc. So what is the Audi Q5 Sportback like to drive, and which one should you buy? Because as always with Audi, there's quite a lot of engines to choose from, there's a lot of options to choose from, so I think a little bit of advice as to what direction to go towards is probably helpful, because with a few carefully chosen specifications, you can take this car from good to great. And that's because even as an absolute base model, like the white diesel pictured in some of the scenes of this video, even a Q5 Sportback with nothing extra spent on it is very good. And I think that's heartening, you know, because we actually don't see base model luxury cars that often that feel like they don't really need any extra options to be sufficient. And yet that's how it is on the Q5 Sportback. You can definitely benefit from adding options. You can definitely benefit from stepping up to more expensive engines, but even the base diesel with 150 kilowatts of power, 400 Newton meters of torque, a 7-speed wet clutch, dual clutch S-tronic gearbox, the Quattro Ultra all drive system, and the 12-volt mild hybrid system, it all comes together really well. And the ride on the standard 20-inch wheels is acceptable, even on fixed dampers. Because oddly, even though these cars are not particularly cheap, you don't even get adaptive dampers as standard, you just get fixed dampers standard. Thankfully, Audi have tuned them pretty well. They err on the side of, like just to the side of comfort, on the comfort to sport continuum, but the body control's okay. However, there's one big upgrade you can do that takes the body control from okay to excellent and really transforms the Audi Q5, whether it's the wagon body or the Sportback. But today, driving these cars back to back on exactly the same piece of road, one after the other, really shows the difference that one option can make. And that is the adaptive air suspension. Now at $4,000, it's an expensive option. It's 5% of the price of this petrol Q5. But I'm telling you, it's more than a 5% improvement on the car. The adaptive air suspension is the one option you can tick that transforms this car no matter which of the engines you choose. It takes the Q5 from good to great. I'll come back to why in a moment. First of all, we'll just remind ourselves of what's going on in the petrol. Now, it's about $8,000 more expensive, but you do get a higher spec on the car as well. But the engine itself is a 2-litre EA888 turbo petrol 4-cylinder, making 183 kilowatts of power and 370 Newton meters of torque. Same 7-speed wet dual clutch automatic as the diesel, same Quattro Ultra system. So there's a different all drive system in the 4-cylinder Q5 compared to the 6-cylinder Q5. Quattro Ultra allows this car to run in 2-wheel drive, that is front wheel drive, but only when coasting or on very light throttle on the highway, for instance, where it senses it can fully disconnect the rear wheels. It will, but really any throttle application beyond absolutely light maintenance throttle in a highway situation will bring in the rear wheels. So anytime you set off from rest, for instance, it's sending a good portion of drive to the back. And on a road like this, a sporty road, you never get the sense that it's front biased. It feels really four square, and if anything, if you commit hard enough on corner exit, it feels slightly rear biased. But on the 6 cylinders, you get a Torsen style all-wheel drive system, which is rear biased mechanically, 60/40. Now, between the petrol and the diesel, I think the petrol will suit most people. It's not particularly thirsty. You can still keep its consumption in the single figures if you're not driving it like a madman everywhere, and it's really refined, and it just has this extra punch. Like, the diesel has really good mid-range torque, really good for highway driving, country overtaking, where it just pulls relentlessly, but kind of so does the petrol. Like, this turbo petrol doesn't really feel at much of a torque deficit to the diesel, and yet it's got more top end, and it just feels sprightlier, and it feels lighter over the nose too. So unless that kind of highway fuel economy is what you're really after, and for some people it will be, Australia's a big country and the diesel will cut your running costs considerably if you're going to do big Ks in this car, I think the petrol would suit most people, including me. And the SQ5 TDI is a real tour de force, but it's more expensive again, considerably more expensive again, and you can check out Ponch's review of that car if you're considering buying a real performance Q5 Sportback. But all of them are sporty enough. All of them stand up to driving on a country road really well. They all make good commuters. Like, this is not a tutted up Volkswagen Tiguan. Nothing really wrong with the Tiguan, but the point I'm making is you can tell the extra expense that goes into an Audi Q5. First of all, it doesn't even share a platform with the Tiguan. It's based on the Volkswagen Group's MLB longitudinal engine platform. It's more sophisticated and refined in every way, and you can really tell because the extra expense that goes into the suspension components for this car really make it more livable in every driving situation. But where you can tell the difference between the standard suspension, the steel springs and fixed dampers, and the adaptive air suspension that we have on this blue car is really in the body control and in the intrusion from bumps. The standard suspension on base 20-inch wheels is good, insulates the bumps pretty well, and the body control is sufficient. It's just over repeated, complicated mid-corner bumps, it can become a little bit too much for the car, and you start to just get a slight sort of whoomph over bumps, and it can kind of slam back down just a little bit too harshly at times. The adaptive air, it just never happens. Audi do a brilliant job on the Q5 air suspension, where it enables the car to just soak up bumps and potholes and speed humps and imperfections and mid-corner bumps on country roads, while still maintaining really great flat body control. It's not quite as uncanny as the 48 volt anti-roll bar setup that you get in like an SQ7 or an SQ8, but this car is nowhere near as expensive as those large SUVs, but you still get a similar effect. Superb body control, but really good bump insulation. On our way commuting out to where we shot today, I was literally aiming for potholes, trying to upset this thing, and it just is unflappable. And that's on optional 21-inch wheels on this car. The ride is completely fine. I almost never say that. I feel like I'm always saying to you guys, make sure you choose the smallest possible wheel. You don't have to on the Q5 if you go for the adaptive air suspension. Best $4,000 you could spend on this car. I'll leave it at that. Now, one thing that's really impressive is refinement. It's a quiet car inside, which means you can enjoy the stereo, and even the bass stereo is okay actually. Or you can just enjoy the serenity because it's really quiet, and the diesel doesn't sound like a diesel. It just has this really nice kind of low thrum to it. Of course, the petrol, there's really nothing to disguise, and if I accelerate here, we can listen. Typical EA 888 noises, kind of raspy and cool sounding at the top end, but just normal petrol 4-cylinder fare really. It's the diesel SQ5 with its extra synthesizers, which sounds really good. Of course, if you're really hung up on synthetic noises, you might not like that, but personally I don't really care. I just look for a cool sound. But this petrol sounds all right. Now, the safety stuff is generally well tuned. If you go for the diesel, you don't get adaptive cruise as standard. You do get that on the petrol. You can option it to the diesel if you want. But the adaptive cruise is well tuned. The lane keep assist, which also is only standard on the petrol, you have to option it on the diesel. It's good. and you can turn it off extremely easily, one touch at the end of this stalk here. The blind spot monitoring, that works well. It's kind of in the side of the mirror there. 360-degree camera is much appreciated, but what we don't have is anything cool like the blind spot cameras that you would get on a Genesis GV70. But we have the bump absorption that you don't get on a 4-cylinder GV70, so there's that. All in all, really, really pleasant car to drive. Easy car to drive quickly, maintain pace, but comfortable around town, easy to see out of, and you can tell it's a luxury car without having to look at the 4 rings on the steering wheel. You can tell the engineering that's gone into it. It just feels polished, and that's what we look for in this segment. So those are my opinions of the new Audi Q5 Sportback. Well, I think I prefer subjectively the styling of the wagon version of this car. The thing that you can't avoid is that the Sportback, just like the wagon Q5, drives brilliantly. These vehicles can handle, they're comfortable, they're well built, and no matter which of the 3 engines you choose, there's something on offer there for a keener driver as well, and none of them even use that much fuel. So this vehicle really kind of solidifies its reputation as a must consider in the mid-size luxury SUV space here in Australia. I would be pushing hard to get a 5-year warranty thrown in though. The fact that it's still 3 years really surprises us. And in terms of my pick, the SQ5 TDI is very indulgent, but it's also 6 figures. This 45 TFSI petrol is a really nice balance. Definitely punchy enough for almost anybody, not too thirsty, and a really good amount of equipment thrown in as standard. Stuff like those Napa seats are pretty nice. Keen to know your view though? Let me know down below. Are you considering the Q5 Sportback, BMW X4, GLC Coupe, vehicles like that? What do you like the best? While you're down below that video, hit subscribe and the notification bell. Help us out finishing the job and getting to 100K. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.